I came to New Haven, Connecticut a few days ago in search of some missing aspects of Liberian history. My quest brought me to the cemetery, and the information I have is that someone who was important to the colonial era in Liberia is buried here, and that is Jehudi Ashmun, the first ACS agent of Liberia. Ashmun had no connection to New Haven, Connecticut that I know of, and I've done research on him for some time. He was born in New York, actually. A mentor of his, Ralph Gurley, was from Connecticut, and that might explain why Ashmun ended up here. Ashmun left Liberia in terrible health. And according to the records from the ship voyage that took him to the Caribbean and then to the U.S., his health was deteriorating along the way. But for some unknown reason, he came to the U.S. and ended up in New Haven, where he died. Ashmun is quoted a lot by Liberians, but in my view, he is not the most consequential ACS agent. I would say that Thomas Buchanan was, but Ashmun had the good fortune to have had a book written about him by Ralph Gurley, and that has shaped a lot of the perception of Ashmun over the years. Because Ashmun is often referred to and quoted by Liberians and Liberianists, a lot of people don't realize that he was quite a tragic character. There's a scandal concerning his marriage. The person he got married to was younger. I have not been able to track down exactly why there was controversy, but in any event, she followed him to Liberia and died there shortly after her arrival. Is buried there. So there's very little information to be found anywhere on his wife, Catherine. Ashmun served for a very short period, came back to the U.S. and died, had no descendants. He had adopted a young African son, a boy who he named Cecil. And I tried tracking Cecil, through historical records, only to find that Cecil had died fairly young himself. So there are many layers of tragedy that followed Ashmun, and he died in his 30s. Standing next to Ashmun is a plaque honoring several Africans who were aboard the slave ship Amistad. And that ship is famous because the captive Africans on board overpowered the crew and took over control. And the ship ended up in U.S. waters. And so they were emancipated. But some of them were sick. So a lot of people quote The
Ralph
clock
Gurley's book on the life of
in the
Jehuti
cemetery
Ashmun,
is
and
in
will
the
not
hour.
ask any questions. And so there are things that that were said in that book, sometimes by Gurley, or sometimes, he was quoting Ashmun, and they proved to be inaccurate. He made a very disparaging comment about Lord Carey, for example, and eventually there was a leader of the Baptist Missionary Convention who was writing a book, and he requested input from other people about Lord Carey, and he wanted information from people who were present, who knew the story. He wanted second opinions, and that was the only reason why, the narrative that came through that book on Ashmun about Lord Carey ended up being corrected. And so there's a lesson in there for all of us. Just because one person says something doesn't necessarily make it true. We have to look for other sources wherever possible to compare and to see, where the truth lies. But I mean, that's just a fact of life. It's just something that all adults know or should know, and how we should carry ourselves. If someone comes to you and says, hey, this is what happened with an individual, it would behoove any of us to get a second take, to get information from someone else, rather than simply take a disparaging story to be fact.
Ashburn is not only buried here in New Haven, but there's also a street here named after him, just as there's a street in Monrovia, Ashburn Street.
So why would Ashmun receive all of this attention with the naming of a street in the U.S., in a town he was not born in, and there's no record he lived here? Well, a lot of that is due to the fact that Ralph Gurley wrote a book about him, and that made him into something of a celebrity. Ashmun himself wrote a lot of articles that were published in American newspapers while he was living in Liberia. And he was not shy about patting himself on the back, praising himself. So that helped to spread a kind of renown. And at that time, while he was serving in Liberia, the 1820s, there was a tradition in American literature of people writing stories about missionaries who were martyrs. They went off to far places and they died, in the service of their church or of the religion. And so those individuals will be celebrated. Ashmun himself wrote a book like that, a brief kind of booklet about someone he knew and admired, and so it was not unusual that the same ended up being done for him.